I don't necessarily think we need all of these different supplements if we have a relatively small variety of functional mushrooms. Things like mushrooms and cannabis are possibly our biggest allies out there because they're really helping us engage with these internal systems. So for me, it's trying to get people as geeky as I am, as excited as I am when it comes to mushrooms. And through getting excited, you actually make better choices about the products and you stop wasting money. These products are really expensive. I have the opportunity to make some connections with CEOs of companies who are testing their products, and I can get a real insight into why it is that one product is superior than another. I have the space to really take in this knowledge, and I want people to get to that point as well.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psychedelic Conversations. Today we have Oli Genn-Bash in the house. Welcome, Oli. So good to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invite. It's great to be here.
It's our pleasure, and looking forward to getting to know you and what are you doing in this psychedelic space. So before we get into it, if that's okay, I will share a little bit of your bio with our listeners. And then, of course, we'll add everything to the show notes, guys, if you want to check Oli's links and if you want to get to know the work that he's doing, especially on social media. You're quite active. You have a good voice, so I really appreciate that. So you are a founder of the Fungi Consultant. Do you say fungi or fungi?
I say fungi. It's a weird one. It's like some people say fungi, some people say fungi.
Yeah.
To me, I've just always, I guess it's the English pronunciation, but it just seems to, I've grown up hearing fungi, fungus. So yeah. I call it the Fungi Consultant.
Okay,
but if you want to call it the fungi
Fungi is good.
Consultant, go for it.
Fungi is good. Thank you. And you are also co-founder and former president of the University of Kent Canterbury Psychedelic Society.
Yes.
For the past 15 years, you've been involved in advocating the use of psychedelic plants, fungi, and cannabis through engaging with grassroots community organizations, whilst collaborating with notable figures in the psychedelic field to organize talks in places such as London, Margate, and Brighton. Quite impressive, Oli. We'll put everything in the show notes, but
psychedelics. It really is that joy that I get from the experience of psychedelics and the creativity that comes from my experiences. That's the kind of driving force. That was my intrigue into psychedelics. I'm a musician, so for me, I grew up listening to a lot of the music from the 60s and 70s. My dad is now in his late 70s, so I was brought up kind of within that slight psychedelic adjacent subculture. My dad was more of a sort of left-wing beatnik, but the music he listened to was very much within that framework of the psychedelic infused music. A lot of stuff like Jimi Hendrix and the Beatles, and I was obsessed with Jimi Hendrix growing up, and you know, the sound of it, but also the visual aspect, him tripping on LSD and setting fire to his guitar, you know, these things that were just quite exciting and a bit dangerous. There was this sense of mystery and intrigue, and yeah, just being aware of that subculture, the 60s, 70s. Psychedelics were always something that I was interested in from a cultural sense. And then, yeah, my experiences at university with psychedelics then led me to meet with other people. And my friend who I was playing music with at the time, who turned me on to psychedelic literature, then spoke to me about this guy, Dave King. It was my friend Jacob Brandt, and we set up the Kent Psychedelic Society in, I think it was 2009, 2010, which then, it was the catalyst for the first Breaking Convention conference at Kent University in 2011. And then since this time, I've just been engaging within a wider psychedelic mindset, I guess, part of the fabric of the psychedelic story.
Amazing. Thank you so much for sharing. I'm hearing that you may come from a background of maybe creative, recreational use rather than a medical, therapeutic. Would you say that, or?
Yes, yeah, I will definitely say that. And that's not to say that I have not gained a huge amount of benefit and really recognized the therapeutic healing benefit from it. But my interest in it was not about healing trauma. That seemed to be, it was an important side note at the time. It was an important legitimizing factor. So we were interested in the therapeutic side because it actually gave some weight to those experiences that we were having in the creative side of things. But overwhelmingly, it was driven by music. My musical world was just opened up by people I knew who had a great taste in music and coincidentally really enjoyed LSD. And, historically, we know those two things go hand in hand quite well. And yeah, there was just a lot of quite explicit use of psychedelics in that way of going to see music whilst being under the influence of psychedelics, of doing art whilst under the influence, of really engaging in that eminent experience of what does it mean to be on psychedelics and be creative. What is that very real process, that feeling that you get when you paint or you play some music that you've not heard before and you tap into that wider creative field. So yeah, for me it's the LSD in particular. It's just like creative rocket fuel.
Mhm. Thanks for sharing. I think I was at one of the breaking convention. I think they did an evening where there was a panel talk. So each person speaker was representing. Should it be used through like the indigenous sort of ritualistic approach? Should it be a sacrament from like there was another person with the representing church and using this as a sacrament, and then there was medical people, and then there was a psychotherapist, and then there was this mystical people, just kind of. And then it was the most interesting conversation to witness, just all of them coming together on that panel. It was actually quite eye-opening because that's exactly what psychedelics do. They bring us together so that different views, different opinions, different arguments around how best approach and, safest use of the psychedelic medicines. And then there they were, like all of them sitting together and discussing. So currently, as you may already be fully aware, that it's kind of leaning towards the medical and the medicalized or psychotherapeutic use. What are your thoughts on that currently? What are we doing compared to, the 50s and the, in the history?
Yeah, it's a really interesting history, and it's quite a recent history, and it's complicated. These substances in the 50s and in the 50s were being used for psychotherapeutic use. There was interesting stuff happening with alcoholism and LSD, and then we start to see at the end of the 50s, beginning of the 60s, the organizations like the CIA and the military get their hands on these substances and start to experiment with them. And that's all, that's not conspiracy theory. That's all declassified with the MK Ultra experiments. And it seemed like the positive moves that were made in psychotherapy in the 50s and early 60s were derailed by government agencies who wanted to see how they could use them to control and manipulate society. And, that didn't really seem to work so well. And then there continued that underground use of psychotherapy. I've spoken to people who were doing what they perceive to be quite positive work in the sort of 80s with MDMA, before it was, access to it was made illegal in the late 80s, I think it was mid to late 80s. So there were lots of people doing good work and with a lot of positive results. And then, it just, I think the stuff surrounding subculture, unfortunately, and the counterculture, unfortunately, was used to derail the positive aspects of it. And now we're starting to see something happen where we're seeing a snapback against that. People think that the 60s and 70s were catastrophic for the advancements for psychedelic therapy. And so now we're in what feels like I don't know what you could call it. It's a hyper scientific, or it's always deferring to scientism. We are looking at psychedelics within this lens of, okay, well, what do the experts say about it? And the narrative then tends to come from there. I'm not saying that psychedelics aren't a massively important tool for psychotherapeutic use. We've seen that. I've personally done a lot of work on myself that has been really positive. And, the sort of going back to what we were talking about at the beginning, speaking about it recreationally, okay, well, I've used it creatively, but also those creative revelations have maybe come through a spiritual connection to that experience. And through that spiritual connection, that brings me to a place where I am experiencing healing, and therefore there is a therapeutic effect of that. So I don't know how specifically we need to go into these strict frameworks of thinking about molecules and pathways in the brain and this kind of framework, because to me it just suggests, okay, well, that's within the scope of pushing forward a certain narrative that requires funding and resources, so it has to talk about things in a certain way, but it's not the whole picture. And people get a lot of benefit and healing within the community spaces, the creative spaces, the cultural spaces. So I think we're at an interesting point now where there's a lot bubbling up right now.
Yes. Thank you so much for sharing. Yeah, that kind of summarizes the timeline, doesn't it? I'm very aware of the couple Shulgins, for example. They carried on. She was doing the first group therapeutic work with group of people in psychotherapy, a psychotherapeutic approach. So I think it's always been there. And I'm guessing maybe we need to talk about it more so that we can sort of legalize, maybe help push the legalization, bring in some kind of harm reduction, safety measures, maybe. I guess probably that's the direction that everyone's trying to take, given the level of, landscape that we are in, we find ourselves in, especially in the UK. How do you find it? You were co-founder of Psychedelic Society in Kent. So how do you find, especially in the UK, because I always feel like there is more openness and willingness across the pond, US, or maybe I'm just not aware, because I live in the UK and I always find that it's not as easy to talk about psychedelics over here. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that?
It's really interesting because historically the USA is a more conservative society in the way in which, culturally, historically, if we think about the psychedelic 60s and 70s, that was really coming from, a lot from the UK. There was, obviously pockets of stuff happening in the US on, with the people like Timothy Leary and musicians, but a lot of, that free, 60s, swinging 60s culture that we think of came from the UK. So I think we do have this deep kind of spiritual, creative interesting side to the UK that is connected to pagan culture and folklore and all these different types of things. But and the UK, we take the most drugs out of any country in Europe. So there's a real, rave culture, that whole thing was massive in the UK. And then we had a big clampdown of the legislature. So legislatively, we're more controlled. And in the US, there's more freedom on the state level. There's more of that freedom in terms of that social equity to actually access these psychedelics. But I still think the UK has we've got that kind of party culture, that rave culture, where we are a bit edgy and a bit, we're not afraid to talk about these things on a cultural level. When people get together at Breaking Convention, for example, you often see the pockets of like the English psychedelic heads, the British, the UK psychedelic heads getting together, and we're a little bit boisterous. We're a little bit, cracking a lot more jokes. Maybe I've found with other people in the psychedelic space, it's less easy to maybe joke around with. So there feels like a certain, I guess what I'm getting at is like a certain eccentricity about the UK, which allows for more of that quintessentially psychedelic weirdness.
Makes sense. Feels like, the contrast. There is a contrast, the need to be sort of reserved, and then there is the other side equally, could be out there. Yeah. So is that really factual information about UK being the country of using the most drug?
I think so. In Europe, I'm pretty sure it's I could be wrong, but as far as I'm aware, the most drug use in Europe is in the UK, because if you think about where we're positioned in Europe, we have, we're an island. There's no, there's the other island in Europe of the same size is the Republic of Ireland. They have crazy strict drug laws. So the drug laws in the UK are actually, well, like the enforcement in the UK is relatively relaxed. I don't know if that's because comparatively the UK is quite a corrupt country. So there's probably a lot of people in, customs that are being paid off and allowing a lot of drugs in. I mean, to give you an example, I lived in Kent for the best part of 15 years, and I encountered more people doing cocaine in Kent than I did going around South America, because you're just right next to all the ports. You're right next to where everything's coming in, and people just have easy access. There's not necessarily there's not a lot of enrichment in this country. There's a lot of unhappy people. There's a lot of people struggling. And, we've historically had these governments who have been quite, I'd say, authoritarian. And we've responded in a way where, we do a lot of drugs. And we have really good creativity come from that. We have this amazing electronic music scene and psychedelic rock scene, and a lot of the club scene, rave scene, all this stuff to come out of people being sat in their bedrooms doing drugs and making music or making art and doing things where the outside world is maybe a bit tough, and we can find some solace in going to a house party and doing some drugs and creating that community, because our governments have historically made that quite difficult.
Yeah, I hear you. Thank you for the insights. Really interesting to hear from your perspective. So tell us a little bit about the Fungi consultant. What's the mission?
So the mission is education. There's massive gaps in education when it comes to functional mushrooms, also psychedelic mushrooms. But that's, whilst I have a desire to, educate people about the psychedelic side of mushrooms, I think there are a lot of people who are incredibly knowledgeable and experts in their field. When it comes to functional mushrooms, though, there's a lot of companies well, there's a lot of hype, right? There's a lot of hype surrounding lion's mane and reishi and cordyceps. We want things to help our brains work better and be less stressed, and we want to live longer. And there's a lot of companies that have jumped on this, and they've jumped on, the fantastic fungi, the entangled life, Merlin Sheldrake, the influence of people like Paul Stamets. Paul Stamets has his own brand of functional mushrooms. So there's people that have really popularized it. And because of the system that we live in, companies can just set up and produce products, and off you go. They can sell it. If they've got good branding, good marketing, that's kind of all you need. And there's a lot of crap out there. There's a lot of products which don't have high levels of active compounds that are actually going to do something. And I think this is the point. These mushrooms are going to do something to you. I think the public has been misled in thinking that, oh, you take some lion's mane over a number of weeks and you might not notice that it does something, but you might have some perception that your brain's working a bit sharper. And sure, there's definitely something to that, but there's probably a lot going on with the placebo effect, and the placebo is great. The body works in amazing ways, but there are really good quality products out there where if you take them, you will actually notice a difference. You will find that they're doing something. And I really want to champion companies who are producing high quality mushroom products, because for me, they've been a real game changer for managing long-term health conditions. There's so many different supplements out there. You go into a health food shop, you go into Holland and Barrett, and you don't know where to start. There's something for every little ailment. And to me, that doesn't seem very intelligent. Now, when we think about the fungal intelligence, what the fungi do, they come into an area and they go, hey, what's going on? Let's clean this up. Let's sort this out. Let's distribute the resources. The mycelial web, it works in a way where make sure that things are kind of kept in check. And I think that's certainly what the psychedelic mushrooms are doing. And I really do think the functional mushrooms are doing. I don't necessarily think we need all of these different supplements. If we have a relatively small variety of functional mushrooms, we could probably take quite good care of our health. I'd put cannabis in there as well, and not necessarily THC, but CBD, CBG, these other cannabinoids. I think that if we look at our body in a way where we break it down to, okay, are the systems functioning at an optimal level? Things like mushrooms and cannabis are possibly our biggest allies out there, because they're really helping us engage with these internal systems. So for me, it's trying to get people as geeky as I am, as excited as I am when it comes to mushrooms. And through getting excited, you actually make better choices about the products and you stop wasting money. These products are really expensive. You're spending £30 at a time for something that has information on it, but that information might be misleading. So, and I'm probably gonna annoy some people in this space. I'm imagining that it will get to a point where some mushroom companies go, God, this fungi consultant guy is really annoying because he keeps saying our product is rubbish. And I will keep saying your product is rubbish if I think it's rubbish. And that might seem a bit extreme, but I've done a lot of testing on myself, and I frequently speak to experts in the field. The benefit of something like LinkedIn is I think it's quite democratizing, because I haven't been in the mycology world for very long, but I have the opportunity to make some connections with CEOs of companies who are testing their products, and I can get a real insight into why it is that one product is superior than another. And also, I have a lot of time on my hands at the moment. I'm in a position where I'm looking for opportunities, but what that means is I have the space to really take in this knowledge, and I want people to get to that point as well.
Thank you so much for sharing. I think it's really valuable, and I agree with you. There are supplements everywhere. The functional mushrooms everywhere. Before, wasn't so much out there. And now, like you said, very fancy packaging and promising the world and longevity, all those things. It's very interesting how the Western world works in that sense. What should we be looking out for if our listeners are interested in it? Let's say if they are taking already, for example, I thought turkey tail was my favorite. I don't know. What do you think?
Turkey tail's great. Turkey tail's been used for possibly 2,000 years. It's an amazing fungus because it's being used in, there's extracts from turkey tail being used in China and Japan as official pharmaceutical products to treat cancer. So what we're seeing is a mushroom where the ancient wisdom has really lined up with the modern understanding of how to treat conditions such as cancer. So I think
for sure. And what about, what should we be looking at in terms of...
right. What should you be looking at? So this is, it's a bit of a minefield because there's a lot of terminology that gets spoken about. There's words that you might hear. So often you'll see on packaging polysaccharides, and something might say 30% polysaccharides. Now, the majority of people are going to pick that up. They see a number that says 30% polysaccharides and they go, oh, good. I've heard polysaccharides. I've heard that's the good things in mushrooms. There's 30%. 30% seems good. They've got nothing to base that on. Now, polysaccharides are the sugars contained within mushrooms. Literally means many sugars. And some of these sugars are called beta-glucans. Now, this is another terminology you'll hear. So another product might say whatever percentage beta-glucans. And then people go, oh, good, it says beta-glucans. I've heard beta-glucans are the good thing that I need. Brilliant, it's got that. Okay. Beta-glucans are really useful. Beta-glucans are compound in the sugar in the mushrooms, which is helping to modulate your gut bacteria and benefit your immune system through the gut. There's, turkey tail, that's the mechanism of action is the polysaccharides, the one called PSP or PSK, polysaccharide K, is seems to be incredible for treating cancer. So these things do have amazing medicinal value, but not all mushrooms are doing the same thing. So polysaccharides are water soluble. So you might see a hot water extraction. Now that's great for getting the polysaccharides. But if you are using reishi, for example, and reishi is being marketed for sleep and relaxation, then the compounds in the reishi that you're looking for are triterpenes. So if your reishi bottle, of tablets says polysaccharides, and you think, oh, that's good because I've seen it on other mushrooms and that means good. That might not necessarily mean much, because if you're buying that reishi for a particular purpose to help you relax, and it's not got the compounds in it that are alcohol soluble, which are the triterpenes, compounds known as ganideric acid A, these really interesting compounds that we're starting to see in the science that is helping us to understand, okay, what is it doing on these these processes in our body, these systems. It's really fascinating. It's not just me being geeky and wanting to know what the compounds are. It's actually, okay, well, if I pick up a product, which I have done, that says it's a reishi product and it says 3% triterpenes, then I go, okay, at least this company knows that what I'm buying it for is sleep and relaxation. And therefore, the thing I want to look for is the triterpenes, because I'm not interested in the polysaccharides, which are going to help with my immune system. Even though, again, reishi, absolute powerhouse for cancer, immunology, incredible mushroom of immortality, right? So that's one big thing, which is a real minefield and a real just like, for me, it's one of these unknown things where I'm telling people this and they're like, what are you even talking about? I don't even know that I don't know what do you mean polysaccharides, beta glucans? So it's getting to the point where I think people will need this kind of mushroom 101 way of talking about things. And then we see things, we see extract ratios, which are banded around. We see 15 to 1, 10 to 1, 8 to 1. What that means is the amount of starting material which has gone into making the extract. Through my conversations with experts in the field, I'm starting to realize that that is kind of irrelevant. What it means is if you have a 15 to 1 extract, that means you've taken 15 kilograms of mushrooms and you've turned it into 1 kilogram of extract. Now, the way that gets marketed is that means it's really potent because we've put 15 kilograms into this 1 kilogram. Now, if we're thinking about mushrooms in terms of active compounds, that actually means your starting material is relatively weak compared to a ratio which is something like 8 to 1, because that means your product, where you've only had to use 8 kilograms of that starting material, means the quality of your starting material is superior to the 15 kilograms.
Wow. Sounds very complicated.
There's a lot of complicated, and there's a lot of intentional misleading. This is the problem with the mushroom industry, with a lot of health industries. They use things which seem scientific to mislead people into buying products with clever marketing and fancy packaging. And there's no shortage of companies doing that. But there are companies out there that are doing really good stuff, making really good products. So you should look for things which are dual extracted. You can also get triple extracted, where the mushrooms have been, they've been dried, then they've been steamed, then they've been extracted using hot water, and then they've been extracted using alcohol. So that will help get all of the beneficial compounds out, all the water soluble, all the alcohol soluble compounds out. And then really we need to get to the point where we're finding companies who are putting the measurement of active compounds, because it's irrelevant just buying a product for a certain reason. And if it's not been tested, who knows if it's actually going to do what it's saying, because you will then be able to actually build a protocol. If you know, okay, I am taking this capsule of cordyceps, for example, and it has 0.3% cordycepin, then I know how many milligrams of cordycepin I'm taking at a time. And then I can do my research and say, hey, what does the research say about dose of cordycepin for managing these different ailments? So it's about really empowering people. I do, I understand where it gets a bit exhaustive and can go over people's heads. But to me, there's a real sense of urgency, because I see new products coming out every single day, and there's not enough people like myself. People ask me, why haven't you brought out your own mushroom products? Why aren't you using your brand to sell mushroom products? And I have occasionally thought about it, but I see myself in a unique position where actually I can kind of act like a mushroom watchdog, where I'm coming in as an independent third party. I would love to have my own lab and be doing expensive testing myself, but that's totally out of my field. But what I can do is try lots of products on myself, talk to experts, have a real insight into the field, where I'm acting a bit like mycelium.
Yeah, sounds amazing. This is very helpful, Oli. Thank you so much.
Yeah, no worries.
It really opens our eyes to, wow, when you buy a lion's mane bottle of lion's mane, it's not just lion's mane. There's a lot that we don't know in that bottle. So this is very helpful. So do you provide like a list of everything that you have spoken of? Can our listeners go to your website and learn about different compounds? Is there like a list of these things that we can learn? How does it work?
Yeah, so you can. My website has information. I've also done podcasts as well, written articles. You can get in contact with me, Oli at thefungiconsultant.com, and we can talk more.
Amazing. That's very helpful. And I also like the way that you said you're the watchdog for who's doing what and who's getting away with what. Anything in unintegrous and not coherent with with what they're providing. I think this is really helpful.
Yeah.
Do you think we're also going to be needing more of your version in the psychedelic space as well? People watching, because at the moment we have literally no organizations, or at least, people that regulate these things. And also, what I find so fascinating, Oli, it's we see a lot of facilitators on LinkedIn as well. They speak of the psychedelic medicines as, they speak with conviction. Each person has a unique experience with their medicine. And then there is this bias of speaking of this to be the only truth, and this is how it goes. I find that really fascinating. What are your thoughts? Do you watch those as well?
Yeah. I see the what feels like pontification, becomes a bit too guru-like, and I think, we are existing in an entire ecosystem where there are different ways in which we can engage with it, and some of those ways are, can be quite extreme and quite powerful, and some of them work well for some of them don't work well for others. I don't know whether, I don't necessarily think everyone needs to be on psychedelics. It doesn't seem historically and traditionally that everyone was talking about substances that were being used, or everyone was engaging in these rites of passage. It seemed to be like there was some degree to which, okay, certain people were having these experiences and then coming back to the wider society and sharing that knowledge, but not necessarily trying to get everyone on it. I guess we're in this weird state where we don't really have any sense of tribal connectedness or these types of societies. So no one believes it unless they've had the experience. And I guess, to be cynical, if people are building a career out of providing, and facilitating, then there does, to a certain degree, come with that a need to always be having people coming, engaging in these experiences, signing up for retreats, and I'm not saying that there isn't a need for that, but I have also noticed people in this space that get a bit extreme and a bit evangelical about it. And I think there's lots of ways to access the mystical and the divine. And I don't think psychedelics are easy. I don't think they are a shortcut. I think they're more potent and powerful than some of the other ways of accessing this space.
This is so good. You're the only person who said that. So would you say they're actually hard work?
They're hard work. They're not easy. I don't understand this whole thing of, I've lost count of the conversations where people are like, yeah, but people that haven't taken psychedelics, the point is to get there without them. Like, I mean, is that the point? Who knows? There's valid arguments to suggest that a lot of the religions and spiritual practices were heavily influenced by psychedelics. I wouldn't necessarily say that I've ever had some maybe easy psychedelic experiences. Even the really gentle ones like San Pedro wasn't necessarily easy. There was stuff that I had to work through. It wasn't just easy breezy chill in the park. There was a lot of emotions to work through. It was very gentle. It was very kind to my body. It didn't kick my ass like mushrooms do. I was like, mushrooms are an absolute ass kicking. You compare a mushroom chip to like chanting mantras. I mean, what is experientially, and as well, there's more of a cultural context for these spiritual meditative practices. So there's already a container that exists. There's all of this scripture and traditions and mysteries and all these areas that you can go to, and elders, and we lack that for things like mushrooms. We have to play with the kind of quite limited literature on psychedelia. And, when we were getting into psychedelia, it was going onto websites like Erowid and Shroomery and doing the work of getting them, right? Being in a place where you don't have easy access to these substances. It's actually a rite of passage. It's a lot of hard work to make those connections where, hey, these things are, if you get caught, it's pretty bad. It's not like getting caught with some weed. So you've got to really trust the people. You've got to build this sense of trust. And that requires work. It requires a sense of being ready. There's often the thought that things like LSD finds you. You don't find it. The more you try and search for it, the more it will just try and escape you. So there is that sense of getting your body ready to meet the psychedelics. I was speaking to this really interesting person. I'm not sure if you've come across him, Jaz Razul, and we're talking to him about the architecture of consciousness in the brain, and actually how people's systems and the way in which these substances are working in a biochemical sense with the actual structure of your system. Some people are really susceptible to psychedelics and some people aren't. And some people have difficult times with them because their systems aren't ready for it. So I think it does take a lot of work. And sure, there might be a shortcut sense in the actual practicality of it. Okay, just putting a tab in my mouth is different to sitting on a mountain and meditating for 40 years.
Yeah, it makes total sense. Do you think psychedelics are cultivating us?
Ooh, what do you mean? Like, are mushrooms growing us?
Yes.
Yeah, they could be.
I had a guest. He was, I think he was growing San Pedro. He holds ceremonies with San Pedro. And when I asked him about growing process, he said, "Who's growing who?" He said, so that was really sweet.
Right.
I feel.
Yeah, I think that's.
Would you say that?
Yeah, I do. I do feel that sense of maybe it's a shared cultivation. I've grown a few things in my time, and sometimes I'm like, oh wow, this thing really wants to be grown, and in doing so, then it's passing on its energy in whatever form that might be. Whether I eat it or consume it in another way, there's some transference of energy. So it's like a mutual encouragement of like, yeah, and what happens to you when you're growing certain things. Certainly when you're cultivating mushrooms, it's different to growing plants because these things aren't plants. They're closer to animals. They're like these weird aliens inside your house, and they grow really quickly, which is fascinating to watch. And the impact that has on you. Do you then start to grow as an individual because you are maybe for the first time in your life, you're taking care of something, you're taking the time, you're being really patient, you're thinking in a way that is different, and your consciousness starts to expand and engage within, if you're looking at mycelium, it's like, well, what impact's that having on the structure of your brain? Is your brain starting to work in these mycelial ways? Is it recognizing the shape of the mycelium and then saying, oh, that looks like a good structure, maybe we should move in that way? And then I start to speak to different people. My uncle, who's a quantum physicist, and he's doing research into the fractal nature of consciousness in the brain. I'm like, oh, that sounds, when he's talking to me, I'm like, oh, that sounds like mycelium. So I think there's this interesting recognition that happens, these patterns in nature which are replicated in the body. I think we are all cultivating it. It helps us tap into the wider web of nature, things like Gaia theory. And yeah, I just think, if you've got the space to be able to grow food, just do it. I put some tomato seeds in a propagator this afternoon, as my first planting of the year. And just doing that, it's like, there's something therapeutic about it. There's some notion of, okay, I'm planting. Okay, I'm planting something in here. Have I planted something in myself as well?
Yeah, wow, that's so fascinating. Yeah. Um, Thank you so much for sharing your personal experiences and your insights. This is so amazing to hear. One last question as we're
Yeah.
coming to the end of our conversation. Um, the question is, would you say or agree that there is this sort of like a secret affiliation to LSD globally than any other psychedelic medicine? And why is that?
I mean, this
Because
that's a
people,
whole other.
right, people
Yeah,
really
sorry.
are intrigued, right? Because um, I remember, just to quickly share with you, like I remember
Mm.
I was invited to a panel to speak about microdosing, and then all I could think about was how do we revive LSD again as a therapeutic ally, and or help us, expand the consciousness, because where I'm sure, like you said, underground use never stopped, but there is a real power in bringing it to light. So, and at the end of the panel, as last words, all I could say was, I'm here to support revival of LSD. And there was this big cheer in the crowd, and I was like, kind of like shook by this. So I wasn't expecting.
Mhm.
So,
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting point that you raised. We could there could be a whole podcast about the history of LSD, right? It does have this checkered history where it, as mentioned earlier, was used quite heavily in MK Ultra experiments, and I'm trying to remember the name of the operation where the CIA used prostitutes to give men LSD and just like see what would happen. And these really weird experiments, psychology experiments that were happening in the 60s with LSD, and quite nasty experiences. And it's a really powerful, potent drug. Talking active in what, like 10 micrograms? I mean, that's crazy. If you have 200 micrograms, that is a really, really full on trip. We're talking such small amounts of, and interesting, sort of going back to just what I was talking earlier about fractals. It's like, hey, maybe there's some fractal stuff happening with LSD where you've got this tiny thing where there's all this universe contained within just this little square of magic. And I think there isn't anything so powerful that can help remove people's barriers, help them to really flow and become the best version of themselves through what I feel like is LSD's quintessential childlike joy and engagement with it. The wonder that you have with LSD, I don't think is like anything else. The you just, when I talk about it, I get excited. I think about it. It's like the most magical thing when you're staring at a pattern in a flower or grains of wood on a table, or just looking at a tree so intensely for the first time. There's not anything I find that gives such richness on all of these different levels. And for me as a musician, feeling like it's changed my relationship with music, where I feel like the music is flowing through me, and then I it everything is able to flow better because I'm less attached to that ego state where it's me doing it. I'm just like, oh, brilliant, cool. I'm a vessel for this music. Hey guys, let's just flow. And yeah, I really go so far as to say I love it. Don't get me wrong. I've had some experiences with LSD when I was younger where I was a bit irresponsible and they were a bit hairy. Nothing too dangerous. Nothing ever went wrong. But, some experiences which weren't very positive and shook me a little bit, and I had to do some work on. But overwhelmingly, I think, there is, because of the duration of it, that's where I think people see difficulties with it being used in a therapeutic sense. I wonder if that is just because of the nature of the, we call it pharmaceutical industrial complex, that wants the quick fixes and it wants to, use the things which are easily accessible and short acting, that's why MDMA, psilocybin, I think, have a lot of promise about them, because the time in which they last isn't very long. I think that's why DMT is being used. I think that might be why LSD hasn't had so much attention as the others, although I do think it still garners a lot of attention. But yeah, for me, I'm like, I don't even find mushrooms psychedelic. Mushrooms are this, I don't know, edible alien technology or something. And the LSD is, I mean, interesting. It does come from a fungus, right? Originally, it comes from derived from ergotamine, from the ergot fungus. So I think it is, hey, maybe that's an alien as well that attached itself to some rye grain. And yeah, I do think it's got unbridled potential, and it would be great to see it make a comeback in a way that doesn't get derailed, where people aren't taking crazy doses, where people aren't, I don't know, starting cults or whatever, but they're using it in a sort of structured cultural. I think it's an amazing thing for kind of cultural revival.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's coming back a little bit into the mainstream now. You may have seen MindBio is the leading that I follow, the organization. They've done a lot of take-home LSD microdosing trials.
Okay, right.
Yeah. So we have Beckley Foundation, as you know, the first lady of LSD, Amanda Fielding, as always.
Yep.
She's been doing a lot of research on that. But I think that's the whole point, maybe. The whole point is the duration, maybe.
Yeah.
So yeah,
I love it. It's funny, when I was younger, I used to prefer magic mushrooms because it had a short duration, and it would it would take you and lead you on this journey, and it would be, I wouldn't necessarily it wouldn't require so much. And LSD, okay, it felt like a bit of a burden, like, whoa, I've got these 12 hours to fill, all this time to fill. What am I going to do? And now I love it. I'm like, oh, brilliant. Let's just, 12 hours to go and explore or paint or listen to music or do all these different things. And it's like a gift to have that amount of time that feels like a million years. It's like your perception of time slows down in that. So not only is it a long duration, but it actually is shifting your perception, where you could be doing something for a few minutes and then you're like, oh man, I felt like we were there for hours. And it's like stretches these, it's amazing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Great. Thank you so much, Oli. So
thank you.
Before we leave you, can you tell us where our listeners can find you? And is it fungiconsultant.com, your site? And then
it is, yeah, the fungiconsultant.com for all fungi related matters. And for me, if you want to connect with me personally on social media, find my music as well, shout out to my band Codex Serafini. You can find me on Linktree/Oli Genn-Bash, all one word. And there's articles, videos, and links to everything else.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate it, and
amazing.
Hope to have you back soon. Yeah, and also hopefully see you at the Breaking Convention, the conference.
Yes, hopefully see you then. Amazing.
Thank you. Bye for now. Thank you, everyone, for listening, and I hope you guys enjoyed this conversation. Please get in touch, drop a comment, or as always, feel free to share and say hello. Don't be shy. See you on the next one. Bye for now.